Welcome to this episode of Crossroad Connection. My name is Art Van Walde and I'm your host today. And I have the privilege of introducing to us Burt and Anita Folsom. They are authors of a book, Death on Hold. And they're going to be talking with us today about this book, but specifically about who this book is about. This book is about Mitch Rutledge and their relationship with him. So welcome, Burt. Welcome, Anita. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about this relationship that you have developed over decades with a gentleman by the name of Mitch. So let's first begin by you telling us a little bit about yourselves. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to reach out to this gentleman?
Right. I'm a college professor.
Okay.
I teach history at Hillsdale College here in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Anita also works at Hillsdale College.
I direct the Free Market Forum for Hillsdale College. And so we're on campus each fall in Hillsdale, Michigan. But we met Mitchell Rutledge, the subject of the book, actually through Time magazine in 1983.
How did that happen, that you met him through Time magazine?
The death penalty had been reinstated. And Time magazine had a full article on capital punishment and the death penalty. Mitch had committed a murder and was in prison. And on death row, he was illiterate. He, according to the article, had a very low IQ. But what attracted us both to Mitch was that he admitted what he did was wrong. Everybody else quoted in the article blamed society or said they were innocent. Mitch said, what I did was wrong and I'm sorry for it. So Anita and I talked about it. I couldn't sleep that night thinking about it. And I thought, he needs to know he's on death row. He may be executed in a month or two. He needs to know he can go to heaven. And so I wrote him a letter. I had to do it in block letters because it said he had a very low IQ. And I said, you were good to admit that you had done wrong, and you can go to heaven. Jesus will forgive you, and if you will receive Jesus, you can go to heaven. And it was a simple letter. And Anita was amazed because, I mean, I didn't even know how to exactly send it because the article said he was from Holman, living in Holman Prison, Alabama, but they didn't have a city and there was no town named Holman. You couldn't look things up online. So I had to guess at a zip code. I just had to put Holman Prison with really no town and hope that the letter got there.
And it got there.
Anita was making the point that she sent a letter to her mother, right, in the next county. And it didn't, and it came back because she had one letter off on the zip code. So I guessed the wrong zip code. I was way off. I didn't have a city. They also have prisoner numbers. And I didn't, of course, have that on the letter. But the Lord directed the letter and it made it into Mitch's hands. The article said he had no friends. Nobody visited him except his lawyer. And he had a response that an inmate helped him write that thanked me for writing and asked me if I would continue to write him. We thought he might be dead in 6 months or so. We did write him and developed a relationship.
Now, when I was reading a bit about this, he had to have someone read it to him, correct?
Yes.
Because he could not read.
Correct.
At that time, he could not read or write. He had grown up very poor on the streets. His mother was 13 when he was born. And then after he was born, she had three more children by three other different men. So she had 4 children, 4 different fathers. He grew up basically on the streets. When his mother was 29, she died suddenly. He was 16 and he was on the streets really by himself. And from that point on, hustling, couldn't read, didn't have anyone to help him. And finally, he was in the middle of trying to steal some drugs from a guy who had cocaine and marijuana, and he killed the man. And then he was arrested, was on trial for first-degree murder. And at that point, he cried out to God and asked God to help him. And he had a miraculous encounter with the Lord in jail. And all he knew was he thought, I know God is real. And he touched me. And from that point on, he began to pray to God to help him get friends because he was alone. And he knew, and when he was sent to death row for killing that man, he was on death row, but he couldn't read and write. So he thought, I've got to have some way to get to know people. I'll have to learn how to read and write. And he began to pray that for God's help that he could learn to read and write. And he watched television and wrote down words in commercials.
Oh, wow.
Like aspirin, detergent. He knew the letters and some of the sounds that the letters made. So toothpaste, he would copy down words that he could see on the commercials, practice pronouncing them, and then he had them available in case he would ever need to use them, or a part of the word like tooth instead of toothpaste.
So he had a fellow inmate then write back to you.
He had them write the body of the letter, but even the other inmate writing, the first letter we received from him was hard to understand because the person who wrote it was very poorly written. But Mitch copied our address from our return address. He just copied that himself, got it on the letter. So we did get a letter back from him, and we wrote him back. We went back and forth with letters for quite a long time. And then he wrote us and told us that he could have visitors, and he would put our names on his visitors list. So in 1984, the spring of 1984, we drove from where we lived at that time in western Kentucky, where Burt was teaching at Murray State University. We drove from there down to southern Alabama to visit him in prison, and we sat in the visiting yard at the prison, and in a few minutes in walked Mitchell Rutledge, and this big 6'3" young man in his early 20s, very nice looking young man, and he walked in. He was so nervous. That was the funny thing. He was nervous, and I kept thinking we should be the ones who were nervous. But
when the maximum security prison doors shut behind us, I was nervous.
Oh, I know. Trust me, I
Yes.
know what that sound is like.
yes. Yeah, so we sat there, and in the book I mentioned, we were around a small table with 4 stools around the table, Mitch on a stool, Burt, me, and it was as though on the 4th stool, the Lord, you know, Jesus was sitting there listening to the conversation. I've never had such a strong influence of his presence other than when we visited Mitch the first time. But we sat there and talked to Mitch for over an hour, and then we shook hands and got up and left, and we told him we'd try to come back again. And we walked out, and the first thing Burt said when we were out on the sidewalk, Burt said, "That guy's a lot smarter than any 84 IQ," because Time magazine said he had an IQ of 84. And that started our relationship.
I was just thinking with him watching TV and writing down words and then learning how to pronounce them.
Right.
In that article that I read, it said an IQ of 84. I was thinking, no, he has a much higher IQ
Yes.
than that.
Absolutely.
He's he's an intelligent man.
Because we've included in the book the poems he's written, and you can tell the way his mind works is that of a very intelligent person.
So where did this relationship go? You met this first time. You felt like there was a 4th person in the room with you,
Yes.
and obviously, Jesus is making this connection. The letter gets to prison with the wrong zip code, no prison ID number. By the way, that's phenomenal to me.
Yes.
Because I have written so many letters to prisoners, and you have to put down their ID number. And for that letter to get to him without an ID number or a zip code,
Was a miracle.
It's a God thing. And so you meet him, Jesus is in the room with you, you sense that like you haven't sensed it before. Where does this relationship go now?
Well, the next step was he was having a new sentencing hearing. Remember, he's on death row, ready to be executed. But his lawyer was very competent and was able to get a new sentencing hearing, which would give a jury the chance to put him in general population. In other words, life without parole or execution. And so Anita, we had just had a child, and Anita was having to take care of the child. I went down to testify on Mitch's behalf as a character witness at his trial. And that was quite an experience trying to help him get off death row. He lost the case. And I thought, again, he was going to be executed. But the prosecutor made a mistake in what he told the jury about the nature of the death penalty and life without parole. So there was yet another sentencing hearing.
A second sentencing hearing in 1989.
8 years after he'd been first put in prison for his crime. Anita was able to come down for this one. And we both testified and he had another friend that he had met a Catholic nun, who came in and helped. And we were able to combine efforts, and the jury gave him life without parole.
Oh, wow. What was that like for him when that was given?
Well, it was startling. It was just euphoric. We were all so pleased for him to have that jury. And we told him, I said, now, Mitch, I would rather be executed and go be with the Lord than spend life with those kinds of people for who knows, for decades. And we talk about that in the book. The prison conditions, the threat, the aggressiveness that you have in there, that is not a pleasant situation. But Mitch said, I want to live. In effect, he said this, I've spent my whole life apart from the Lord and I haven't accomplished anything. I want to live. I now can live for God, even in this situation.
He discovered that even behind prison bars, you can be free.
Yes, yes, he
That's
has.
right.
And it was an adjustment for him after he'd spent 8 years on death row. Then he had to adjust to the transition into the general population of the prison. Because of course, suddenly you're not just locked in a cell for 11 hours or 24 hours a day almost, minus some exercise time. He's out in general population, and you have to deal with the gangs in the prison and the dangers from that and the distractions and the violence that you see around that. It wasn't long after he was in general population that he saw his first murder. Another inmate stabbed an inmate to death. The other thing, though, is there were some opportunities. So as soon as he got into the general population, he started checking in could he take GED courses. He wanted to earn his high school diploma.
I know, I read that, and so he did do that, correct?
Yes, he got into the GED program and studied, and he took the test the first time, and he failed it the first time. So then he figured out what he was the weakest in and asked around trying to find another inmate who had a little more education than he did. Found an inmate who would help him, and he helped him study, so he studied on the parts that he had done the most poorly on the test.
So hold it, this gentleman is going through the prison, finding other prisoners who know more than him in these subject matters. And
That's
he's saying,
right.
Tutor me.
That's right.
And he took the test then the second time, and as he says in the book, he always got at the end of the line to wait for the results, because you went up one by one to the teacher when the grades came back. And the second time he got up to the teacher, and the teacher said, congratulations, Mitch, you passed. And so he had his high school equivalency. And,
wow.
And then he actually started taking college credit courses.
Now here's a guy who taught himself to read while he's waiting to be executed, and now he's off death row taking college level courses, and they eventually had him teach a course at the prison.
Oh, wow. What course did he teach?
It was a course in prison adjustment.
Yeah.
But the inmates liked it so well that they had to set up rules, because everybody who was taking other kinds of courses wanted to come in and take Mitch's course. So they had to put a cap on the number of students who could come in to hear him teach.
It's obvious to me that God has a purpose for him.
And a teaching ministry. They had, the warden had him minister or lecture, I guess you might say, to at-risk youth who were brought into the Alabama prison. And I mean, we call the book Death on Hold because it was on hold, but once he's in population, it continues to be on hold while he makes a difference in the lives of high school students, middle school students, and others who are creating minor crimes and are brought in, and Mitch explains, here's what's going to happen if you continue down that path. He had a talk where he had, on one hand, you have this life if you go down the wrong path, which I have. You can go down this path, it will lead to a family, it will lead to a job, it will lead to making an income and being successful. And that was such a powerful lecture. So many people commented on it, parents, that they took the lecture, taped it, and sent it into the Alabama school system, where apparently in some counties it actually reduced truancy.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we need to take a break. And when we come back from the break, we want to continue talking about Mitch. But I want to transition the conversation to talking about both of you, what God has done in your life through Mitch. So we'll get to that after the break, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Stay connected to what's happening at Crossroad Bible Institute with Crossroad Network News. This free magazine is designed to keep you informed and inspired about what Christ Church is doing in prisons and jails. If you'd like a free subscription to Crossroad Network News, fill out the form online by visiting us at cbi.fm.
Welcome back to this episode of Crossroad Connection. We have Burt and Anita Folsom with us. They are the authors of the book Death on Hold, and we're talking about Mitch Rutledge. And as we're talking about Mitch, it's obvious to me you've had many years in relationship with him. How has this relationship changed the both of you?
There's a perspective you get when you're around somebody with so little and whose life is so precarious. And it makes me grateful for everything that I have, and Anita too, and Adam. The second thing is he's a friend. See, that's the thing. He asks about us. When we talk on the phone, it's not just what's going on in his life. He's genuinely interested in what our son Adam is doing, what Anita's doing, what I'm teaching. Do I have problems with students? I will sometimes go to him for advice on dealing with cantankerous people. I mentioned in the book, there was a time I came in and I lost my wedding ring swimming, and I hadn't gotten another one, and Mitch said, "Where's your wedding ring?" I said, "Well, I lost it." You know, I said, it feels tight anyway, and he said, "If you wear a wedding ring, you're making a statement to your wife, and when you don't wear one, the danger is you're also maybe making a statement, especially since you're a college professor, you're teaching around students. You might want to consider getting a ring." He was right. I mean, I did it right after the visit. My point being, he thinks about us, he cares about us, and he wants the best for us as we do for him. So we're talking about we gained a friend, an advisor, and someone whose life is an inspiration to us.
What do you see God doing in you through this relationship? Anything specifically that God has done in your lives?
God is the God of hope. And
Amen.
if one thing that anyone listening to this interview can do, there are web pages on this book it's called deathonholdbook.com, deathonholdbook.com. And if you go to that web page, there is a video on there. If you click on the video, you'll actually hear Mitch's voice. It was over the telephone, but it's recorded. And Mitch says, he says, never give up. God is the God of hope. Never give up. Things can change. They change for me. God is the God of hope. And that really has been what I've seen. And now Mitch, as a much more mature Christian, we were talking about getting him out of prison, which we would very much are hoping to do, even though he has a sentence life without parole. And Mitch was saying, well, if I get out, it will be God getting me out. And see, when we first got to know him, he didn't say things like that. But it's just seeing God move. The Lord moves over a long period of time, and it is seeing seeds that grow day by day by day.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is this, is you see God birthing hope in him and watering and growing this hope.
Yes.
But not only is God doing it in him, he's doing it in you, because isn't that the way God works? We see something in someone else's life, and God uses that to transform and to mold us.
I think one of the big lies from the enemy is discouragement, and to tell you, oh, it's so bad today, you're just pitiful, this is never going to get any better. And that's a lie, because God is the God of hope, and God is the God of a new chance at anything, or a new life. And God makes you new if you ask him to. And that is a message that I want people to get when they read the book.
Well, someone once said to me, God is faithful. And faithful is, the best way to explain faithfulness is it's best read like a Hebrew word, backwards. So as we look to the past, we see God's faithfulness again and again and again. He's a God of faithfulness and a God of hope, and he provides and loves his people. If he's done that consistently and always in the past, won't he do it in the future?
Yes.
Excellent reasoning, and I believe that's absolutely correct. that God is a God of hope. God is a God of action, not just hope, but a God of action. And 1 Corinthians teaches us that this is not the power of words, it's the power of action. Paul says, I don't come with mere words, I come with actions. And Mitch has seen times when he's been protected in prison. He's seen situations where he could change lives in prisons, where people were wanting to kill another person. Mitch is able to intervene and say, well, let's look at the problem this way. Talks the man out of that. And he is a force for good. He's been elected to be the leader among the honor dorm in the prison. I'd say that's pretty good for somebody who was on the streets at age 16, couldn't read, and ends up in prison on death row a few months from execution. Not a bad achievement.
Again, God is a God of redemption. So how are you working about to bring about his parole? What's going on with that?
Well, nowadays, if you remember years ago, Bill Clinton, when he was president, at the end of his presidency, he gave many, many, many midnight paroles right at the end of his presidency.
Yes.
And that was very controversial because some of them were they looked as though they were payoffs. At any rate, many state legislatures at that point decided that they would pass laws. The governors of many states now cannot parole criminals. The governor of Alabama cannot. The law changed at that point, and for Mitch to get out, as we understand it, the state legislature in Alabama would have to pass a Mitchell Rutledge law and state that he is to be released. And we still believe that is possible.
Okay.
We have sent the book to legislators, and we're going to try to get it in the hands of many more.
Our listeners that are tuned in right now, many of them are writing letters to prisoners on a regular basis. And your relationship with Mitch began with a letter.
That's right.
And it has expanded in ways that are probably beyond your wildest dreams. What advice can you give to those who are listening today about writing prisoners, interacting with an inmate through a letter?
I think it's just tremendously valuable. Don't underestimate you are ministering to that person, because what we have seen over a period of more than 30 years is that it is so important for inmates to know that someone outside is thinking of them and is concerned about them. And letters to them are extremely valuable. And the other thing is, you might not realize this, but getting a letter is actually something that brings a lot of esteem to an inmate. The inmates who get no mail and no visits Mitch says, are actually looked down upon by the other inmates at times. But by writing a letter to these inmates, even if you never meet them, you can show them that you are interested in them, you are investing time into them and effort, and that means to them they are worth something. And you can tell them if they're worth something to you, they're worth something to God.
Amen. Yeah, it's giving value to another human being.
Absolutely.
And Burt, do you have anything you want to say about that?
The downside, you have to be careful. There are a lot of, Mitch is a person of integrity. He's built, since he became a Christian, has built his life on the integrity of his word, trying to emulate the integrity of God's word. When he promises something, he wants to deliver. Most inmates are not like that, which is to say, if you strike up a relationship with a prisoner, and I completely agree with what Anita said, be careful not to get taken in. I would not send money for a long time. You might take a call or two, but there are prisoners who are cons out there, and that's the downside. But the upside is, exactly as Anita said, you can help make a difference and change a life by showing someone that you care.
Yeah, with our ministry with letter writing, we tell our instructors no sending in money,
Good.
no sending in stamps,
Right.
because people need to realize that in the prison, stamps are currency.
Right.
You need to write a letter of encouragement, encouraging the prisoner, encouraging them with the lesson work that they're doing, letting them know what they've done well, and in your letter, letting them know a bit about who Christ is.
Yes.
And that's what we encourage our instructors to do.
That is very good advice. Everything that you just said, I would like to echo on the basis of 30 years experience. I've been in at least once every year in a maximum security prison, at least once, multiple times this year, as has Anita. And you see a lot of prisoners on death row, and you develop ideas on how this works and what works best for them. And what you described right there, I completely agree with every step you said.
As we end our interview, I want to ask a question about Mitch. When we were on break, I asked how old he was and discovered he's in his mid-50s. What is God doing in his life now, and where do you see the next chapter in his life going?
We just spoke with Mitch on the phone on Saturday. He called, and we spoke with him for about 20 minutes. And the next chapter really has begun partly because of that book. Mitch is respected by the other inmates, partly because of his age and the way he carries himself in the prison. They know he used to be on death row. Many of them know he taught himself to read. But the fact now that he has this book out and the other inmates are aware that he has this book, they're coming to him and saying, I want to get a book published about my life. Can you get me a publisher? Or if I write a book, will you write the intro? And Mitch will say, I don't know how to write an intro. He said, my friends did that. But that's really the new phase of his life, is he's having an influence through this book. And Mitch has already told us a few of the other inmates have already read it. And a couple of them have been really encouraged to try to change some things or to realize their upbringings were terrible too. Very few people start with as many strikes against them as Mitchell Rutledge did. But Mitch reached out to God and decided to change his life. And they said they want to make a change, and they're going to do it too. I'm
a big fan of the TV series, the old series MASH. So I watch it on Netflix. And Colonel Sherman Potter gave this statement that I think applies to Mitch. He says, you know, you can't control the pitches that are sent at you, but you control how you swing the bat. And I listened to that episode when he said that. I'm like, wow, that is life. Can we control the pitches that are sent at us? No, but you can control how you swing the bat. And it sounds to me like this man, who's now in his 50s, he's had some really terrible curveballs.
Yes.
Knuckleballs, you name it, thrown at him. But through God's grace, he is swinging the bat, and God is using him to hit the ball. And this man is mentoring other men in prison. That's what I hear the next chapter of his life is.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's what he wants to do. He wants to get out and help prisoners adjust to society. He wants to speak to at-risk youth. He wants to do something to prevent prison from being a disaster. Recidivism is so high, he wants to see it reduced.
And he says, you know, as the title of the book, Death on Hold, God put my death on hold, and I want to point other people in the right direction.
Amen. Amen. Well, the book again is Death on Hold. We've had a wonderful time talking about this amazing gentleman, Mitch, and I want to thank you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Burt, for being with us. I appreciate your time with us in talking about this amazing gentleman, and I pray that through God's grace, he can know freedom on the outside of prison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
And thank you to all of you for listening today. Until our next episode, may God bless you. Have a great day.